Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. Today we're going to talk about one of my favorite ways to fish, and that's in heavy grass. And oftentimes I get a lot of comments from viewers talking about how it can be really intimidating to fish giant grass mats. But I'm here to tell you there are some simple steps that you can do to break those big grass mats down and to really condense that whole area into probably about a 10% area that holds most of those fish. And if you can locate that area, you're going to be much better off and you'll have a lot better success on the water. So I want to give you these three simple tips. Before I do get into that, though, I want to remind you guys that if you want to support the channel and you're looking to purchase some fishing tackle, please use my Tackle Warehouse affiliate link. It's a great way to show some support. Also, if you're looking for additional content from me with tips like this, please check out my members only page where I do additional videos on a monthly basis, as well as a monthly members only live stream. And you can have direct access to me to ask me your questions. All right, so let's talk about grass fishing. One of the most complex and overwhelming types of fishing you can do is fish these giant grass mats. There's lakes throughout the country that have these grass mats that by the time the summer rolls around into early fall, you're talking about just the grass being as thick as it's been all year. If you're familiar with fisheries like a Lake Gunnersville, there's grass everywhere. If you live in the North Country, all of your natural lakes generally you're going to have a lot of grass in them. And realistically, they are starting to hold more fish than any other time of the year because as we get further along into the summer and into the early fall, generally you have less oxygen deep, which means those fish are gravitating a little bit shallower, and the primary cover is going to be your grass beds. But when you have a grass bed that might be a mile long by a mile wide, how do you break that down? Well, I've got some really good tips for you today that if you implement these, you're probably going to have a lot of success fishing these types of areas. The first one that I want to point out is simply using your electronics to look for fish. And I know that's not generally an easy thing to do when you're talking about being in a giant grass bed, but more specifically, I want you idling along the outside weed line. And more specifically, I want you looking for areas where the sun is going to be behind the grass so that it's actually casting a shadow coming off that grass line. And the reason for that is the fish are going to be much more likely to be sitting outside of that grass when there's a big shade line there versus if the sun were hitting that wall of grass directly, the fish will push back into the weeds, so you're not actually going to be able to see them on your side imaging or on your down scan, depending on the depth of the grass. But if you're fishing where the weed is casting a shadow, a lot of times those fish will actually suspend or hold just outside of that hard grass line, making them very easy to find with your electronics. So generally speaking, if I've got a big flat, I'm going to spend some time idling that outside grass line using my electronics to actually see fish. If I see fish, those are going to be good areas. I'll mark them. I'll keep going. I'll do the whole length of the grass line. Maybe I'll find 2, 3 concentrations of fish. At that point, I can go back and fish them if they're still outside of the grass. But if I go back to those same areas when the sun is hitting that grass line and directly exposing to the full length of that stalk, meaning from bottom to top, generally those fish just slide inside of the grass. And that's when I can go down that grass edge and fish those same areas with a bait that's going to get into the grass. So maybe I'm, flipping a heavy Texas rig, maybe I'm throwing a swim jig, something that can get into the grass, or a Texas rig, something along those lines. But I'm really just trying to identify the key sweet spots on that outside grass line. Generally speaking, any of your irregular edges, if you got a little point, maybe a little indent, maybe you've got a place where some rock or something hits the grass line, those are all key areas. And if you graph them, when there's a shadow being cast by that hard outside grass line, you're going to probably be able to see what fish are living in that area. So that's tip number one. Tip number two is similar, but it has to do with graphing the inside of the grass, not the inside line, but just right down the middle of the flat. I'll actually take a big area and do zigzags across the entire grass mat. And what I'm doing is I'm looking for areas within that grass mat that are open. a lot of times what you'll find are certain bottom compositions change and you'll get an actual hole within the grass. And the bass love to use those holes because those are going to be great ambush locations. So I'll actually graph that mat looking to see if I can find some very defined holes. So they could be anywhere from, 3 feet in diameter to something that's 30 or 40 feet wide. The point here is I'm not just going to go fan cast right down the middle of that grass mat because that's going to be a waste of time. You might catch a fish here or there, but if you can pinpoint the sweet spots amongst that grass flat, you can go from, a keyhole. Maybe you find an isolated little rock patch that's creating the hole. Maybe you find an area where you just have a sparser area of grass. But the point is, if you graph it first, you're probably not going to find the fish, but you're going to find the areas that they hold. You can go back, concentrate solely on those areas, and it will make you a much more efficient angler. The third thing to concentrate on, and this is something that often goes overlooked, is the inside weed line. Generally speaking, most grasses will grow to a minimum depth and then stop growing. What that does is it leads to an inside weed line. So if you have grass that's growing from 8 to 4 feet or 8 to 3 feet or 8 to 2 feet, you're going to have a pretty good defined inside weed line that a lot of times those fish like to use as much as the outside weed line. But the inside weed line oftentimes goes very underlooked. And I want to point out too, you can have that kind of same transfer, creating an inside weed line if you're going from one grass type to a second grass type, meaning maybe you've got some milfoil that's growing in 4 to 8 feet, and then you've got some pond grass that starts growing in 1 to 3 feet. Well, there's a gap between those two grasses that may exist because the plant stopped growing at a certain depth, and therefore that creates a good inside weed line as well between the different types of grass. Do not overlook those. They can be excellent. A lot of times the fish like to run those areas where you have two types of grass that are coming together because you may have different thickness of grasses. So if you've got, say, cabbage grass, which is growing, maybe every stalk is a foot apart, to a thick milfoil patch that's almost like a solid mat, they like to run those lines because that will actually be a good area for them to move around and ambush bait as well. But don't think you should just pull up into these giant grass mats and start fan casting. That may lead to a fish catch here and there, but generally speaking, there are high percentage places that you need to locate. And if you can locate them, they can produce you with good numbers of fish and really good size. And if you use these 3 tips, the next time you head out to a lake that has lots of grass in it, I'm telling you, you will become a much better angler at fishing big grass mats, and it'll lead to much better days on the water. So thanks for watching, guys. I hope this tip helps. If it did, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Stay tuned, new video coming out tomorrow.